Hey Chris, we're back talking about the history of politics, about you. Last time we ended up in a time machine to Latvia, to Soviet Union. So let's continue from there.
Sure. Yeah, that was quite interesting that we covered those things, and there's so many of these what we call rabbit holes to go down to, and so much which I found out and discovered. Although at that stage we finished it at the training phase. But perhaps before I talk about training, there's some things that I think could be just remind the audience again, and also some things I may have failed to mention which I think are very important. One of them, in no particular order, is this was a very historical project. This was the first time that Western and Scandinavian troops have been in a former Soviet country and training, in some cases, former Soviet soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
And we were the first to do that. Also, surprisingly, this project, which was a great success, has been forgotten by many, and in many cases I think deliberately so. That is something perhaps we can discuss and maybe discover the reasons why at a later date, because we could term this the rise and fall of the Baltic Battalion, but certainly this part is the rise, which regardless of the fall, there's many benefits that are still with all of the Baltic countries that maybe sublimely happened, even if not systematic. Now, when I first got told I was coming on this project, I also got told that it was until May of the following year. So that was the reconnaissance before Christmas, and that gave us January, or 5 months, that gave us 5 months. And like anything, before you do anything, you establish what the aim is. And as far as we knew, the aim was to train officers and NCOs to operate to a standard, or as good a standard as we possibly could in that time, to our drills and skills, individual, section and platoon. We knew nothing more than that. As I later discovered, and maybe even at the start, this may not have been established. Going back to a comment I made once before, I think it was an opportunity to get the foot in the door of the former Soviet republics. And the way it developed was that we would train the infantry skills, and after completion of producing a well-trained platoons for the 3 Baltic countries, we'd also teach them how to teach what we had taught. After that, they would then go to their own countries and train their own companies. Once you've done that, you've got the 3 rifle companies to form a battalion. Concurrently, as it developed, the Nordic elements, which started to grow, they were going to take on, you could say, the headquarters training roles for the officers, so all the staff jobs. This, we didn't know about when we first went to Latvia. And that's why when we first went, the team itself was really Royal Marines, and on each team there was one Nordic officer. So there's 3 Royal Marines and 1 Nordic. In my case, we had a Finnish lieutenant. This was political because they had very little to do. But they were given tasks, and I'm quite sure it has to start somewhere, so that's how it developed. But of course, the first stage was getting these guys trained to be infantrymen.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I had no imagination to think about where we were going and who we were going to train. It was, as I said before, it was a blank screen. But people are people, countries are countries, so no change.
Mm-hmm.
There's also an absolute tendency, I would say beyond tendency, there's an absolute thinking when you're brought up in a systematic system, when from day one it's A, B, C, D, etc. You know what's written down, you know that will happen, and you know you will be taught to a high standard, and you know that everything you need to train will be there. What prompted me to start to make these comments were a bit of a debrief from one of my friends.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "What do you mean you haven't got instructors? In our case, PWs. What do you mean you haven't got PTIs? What do you mean you haven't got this? What do you mean he couldn't understand it. He couldn't understand it." And I said, "Look, this is just the way it is." And I said to him, as we discuss, especially into the future, we're going to cross this bridge and just find that many armies don't have this mirror image, which I certainly thought that an officer is an officer, which means he's capable of doing this. An NCO is an NCO, which means he must be capable of doing this in leading, etc. Now, our training team, I remember our Sergeant Major saying this, the combined experience was 183 years. Myself was 20 years. And I was a sergeant. Very normal. I actually had to send an email to one of my friends this week who was from the original group. And I said to him, I've had to search my memory between podcasts to try and give myself some sort of framework. Although I've been very careful not to try and write a speech or anything. So it's just to keep it conversational. And of course, if you want to jump in and ask questions, we haven't got to adhere to any script.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I suddenly realised this guy was a conscript. Because I now know what a conscript is. At that time, it was a word that just went over my head. And also, we were told they are sergeants and officers. And I said to, won't mention his name, great guy. I said to him, correct me if I'm wrong, because even I couldn't believe what I wrote. I said, let's call him G. I said, G, I've searched my memory and I've just realised you were a conscript sergeant and you just finished your training. He replied, actually, I had 3 weeks to go to the end of my conscript cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a the conscript NCO, not the so-called professional. I also asked him about the officers, and he said, yes, you're right. A lot of them, because of the age, had actually been conscripts within the Soviet army. If I had known that back in England, it would have severely disturbed my thought process. Now, there's a saying, ignorance sometimes is beautiful, because our ignorance meant that we came here with a fresh mind, and they were just people to train, and they were sergeants and officers. So there's a mirror image.
So at that time you didn't understand that they were conscripts?
No, and I think that was a good thing, because it may have prejudiced our thought process. I don't think it would have been, but it could have been. But I know at the time, and this is the important point, I thought they were just sergeants and officers, which means straight away they're at a high level.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's a different system, and also within the British system, as I mentioned, when I trained the Army Commando course, while there was privates, corporals, sergeants, majors on it. So just because they're a major doesn't mean to say that they may know certain things or they may need refreshing. So there wasn't that, oh, they're officers, you're a sergeant, you can't train them, because also from their perspective, I think, and from other people's perspectives, they would also think, how can sergeants train officers? And it goes back to the people who don't know anything think they know a lot. Same sort of syndrome. I don't think that was the case with the Baltic Battalion, and if it was, it soon got knocked out of them. But I did have a comment said to me later when we got more Nordic officers, and it was actually the Baltic Battalion commander who was an Estonian, and he said to me, you guys were fantastic, so great. So when we started to get lieutenants and captains and majors from the Nordic side, he was then expecting that, you know, if you could call it a ladder of rank, which it is, that if you've reached this level, you must be this good, and if you are this good, this level must be even better. And he shook his head and went, but they're not. and that was the opposite side of the coin, because of their ignorance and their way of thinking.
Their lack of understanding how it works.
So I think it's some things that need to be understood. Well, maybe they don't, but I want to get it out there. Yeah, so that was the platform we started from, with the who we were. I think it's relevant. There's a few things that are relevant for today from that, because it suddenly hit me, and it goes back to a conversation we had in one of the earlier podcasts. And I mentioned Dunkirk, and I think one of the most important things about Dunkirk was not that X amount of officers, NCOs and men were able to be taken back to UK. It was that they formed the nucleus of the new army, because they had the experience, which can only be learnt over time by doing the correct things, or maybe not doing the correct things and learning by that mistake and getting better and improving. So that was a massive mistake from the Germans, because I look at that now as the army training team or the multi-service training team, because the British Army was on its knees, and it needed 3 years really to get big enough to land on D-Day. Because it is possible to train a large army quickly if you've got a core, strong leadership at NCO and officer level, which can feed into the younger guys. And I suddenly realised that our training team was able to train basically they were conscripts who just signed a piece of paper which made them professionals. There wasn't a magic stick which suddenly taught them more information and made them more experienced. They were the same people, except now they're paid, which meant they were professionals. And this guy G was 19, and he said also the average age was 19 of the NCOs, which makes sense. Conscripts at 18, finished conscript service 19. And of course the NCOs were the nucleus of training their own companies when they went back to their own countries. And I think that's very important, because we trained them in 9 months. And that can fit in to the conscript cycle now in the in Estonia. Now, when I've tried to explain what we did back in England on leave, they didn't believe us. And I remember talking to a major in it was in headquarters Royal Marines, so that's the big one. And they said he actually made a sarcastic comment that if you can do that in such a short time, we must be getting it wrong because it takes us so much longer. Obviously, time does give you improvements if the training is done properly. But certainly, you can train quickly without all the frilly elements like doing, marching up and down and all the rest of it. You can actually accomplish a lot in quite a short time. Yeah, so I think that's important to note.
So the training in Latvia initially was 9 months. Then what did you do over the 9 months?
As it turned out, because as I mentioned earlier, we were only there until May. And at no time were we told that one of us would be expected to go with the company or the platoon that we trained to supervise them training their company. Now the key element here is that they were trained, but then one person from that training team then went with them when they did their company training
to their own country.
That, yes. And in my case, jumping ahead a bit, but I don't think there's any problem with that. In my case, as I later found out when asked, would you go to Estonia? I replied straight away, yes. As it turned out, it was Paldiski, which was interesting, and we can talk about that later. The most important point now is that they still had a person with a depth of knowledge who could correct and supervise them. So I wasn't doing all the donkey work, but I was now in a helicopter position to make sure that they kept the standard which we had taught them, and also they could come into my office and say, look Chris, I'm not sure about this, or I'd go into their office and say, look lads, you're okay about this next week or tomorrow, whatever, And once you've got that relationship, well, can you help me? Yeah, sure. And of course, if there was something they couldn't do, I would then reteach it or teach it. So you need that element, because what I did see at a later stage is because you've trained somebody, or because a country has trained somebody, it's what I call fire and forget. You're trained, away you go, and they disappear. And very quickly, that standard disappears. So what you've got is a system that will always go back to zero. It will peak and then drop back to the same standard, zero or whatever the gauge was at the start. And I saw that on numerous occasions.
Yeah. Unless there is a person who really, I don't know.
There has to be a continuity from the providers in the first instance, until the final evolution is we have trained someone to replace me, or the knowledge. It's not me personally, but to replace this experience and knowledge and competence, which took me a long time to learn. So that's the final evolution, and then you've got the full circuit. But without those pivot points of the initial strong training team, and once people are trained, a strong supervision to ensure standards, and also to support the people who, let's face it, we've trained in a very quick time, and they need that support and guidance. And even if they are superbly trained, they will still need the upper level of supervision, because people will let their standards be lowered if there isn't somebody supervising to ensure that standard is kept. And that's in my army as well.
And I think also that
before. You need it.
Yeah. And also, like, if you were just a person who learned, now you have to teach. It's a different.
Well, in this
game.
case, all it means is even more so.
Yeah.
Even more so.
Yeah. Because it's even harder now.
Yeah, even more so. And of course, I was more tolerant of mistakes. Very tolerant, and of course, I saw it as my job to try and ensure that mistakes were not made, so I could judge, and I could actually, with my experience, because one of the, you might laugh at this. No, I think you'll understand this. One of the. Is it a problem? Yes, I'm going to say I use the word problem. I'd like to think that I built a really good relationship with my guys, but Estonians have got a very big ego and pride, and they don't want to say I don't know or help me. And I didn't recognise that, because it's okay, and I certainly understand it, because of all the history. I certainly get it. It's okay. It's not a bad thing to have, but it can also stymie your learning, and you can also make mistakes when you don't need to. So I certainly did learn myself, because I learnt many things doing this. I learnt many things myself. I was always learning things, and I realised that I had to manage the guys in such a way as they felt very comfortable to say I don't know or help me. I think I did that. And
so how do you teach that?
Yeah, so how do you teach it? I think it's by your patient manner, by an empathy for the people you've taught, and understanding their level. Now, of course, if it's because they're lazy, I'm going to be the wolf, and you become the guy who's going to slap people down, and they go, ooh, and they wake up. So there's a balance there. But I think you build any team you build, there's got to be certainly for me, I like it when people find that everybody's approachable, especially leadership, and that means you can pass information freely, and also, you know what, you can listen to them, because often, and I always learn, and I learnt this in a big way. If there's anything you think that could help me, just tell me. And nothing is too silly. Just tell me. I won't condemn you, but if you can, just keep me informed because of this unique situation. And there's nothing is too small to tell me about. You built this two-way road of passage of information, and empathy, and liking for each other. I mean, I like them. I know they like me.
Mm-hmm.
But they also knew, when I had to be a boss, I'd be a boss.
So how do you find balance there as a leader? To be a boss and then be a likable?
I think it's very
whatever.
difficult. But I think it's easier if you have confidence in yourself and you know what you're doing.
That always helps, right?
I found people who won't listen, and people who really find that hard to do, or in fact will not do it, is people who lack confidence, and normally they lack knowledge, and they're frightened that they're going to be found out.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just this I'm in the leadership role, I say you do, and you become very unapproachable. And I found this in my course sometimes, and I could identify it straight away. And we used to get 3 new troop commanders into the company out of training once a year, and you would always have one guy like that who didn't want to listen, and he was always the one who was of a lower standard. And the best one would just say, look, help me. You know, but he's still the boss, but he felt totally at ease to say to his NCOs, help me, tell me what I need to know. I'm not sure about this. And then he would make the decision.
Yeah.
But that's it, he would make the decision. And of course, if I thought it was going wrong, I'd say, boss, don't do that. Especially if you're troop sergeant. But ultimately, because of his position, it's his decision to finally make. But when he feels free to talk both ways and respects also, he doesn't feel embarrassed to ask. And then he will make a good decision based on information. Now, of course, for that leader to do that, the people below him must also be well trained. And if they're not, well, it just becomes the I say you do method of leadership, which actually is a it's not, is it? What is the term for it? Begins with A. It's not. It's oh God, I forgot the word now. There's a definition for this. Autocratic.
Okay.
The autocratic. I say you do.
Mm-hmm.
And the good thing about that is that it means that decisions are made quickly. And certainly in high stress or dangerous occupations, war, police, nurses, the rest of it, could even be ambulance. You know, you can't, as we say, fanny around having a discussion about what you're going to do. It's you see, make a decision, issue an order, they go and do it.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? You can have a balance. And of course, if you've got a good leader, he gives an order. You know it's a good one. You just get on with it. That's the ideal situation, actually. And certainly it's one that I came from. All said and done, you got the order. It was a good one. You got the support. Then you got on with it and did it yourself, with a minimum of supervision. And that because also there's nothing worse than somebody on your shoulder squeaking in your ear, and I can't stand that. And it always leads to things going wrong. But of course, if people aren't trained, it ends up that leader has to basically do their jobs, And we actually mentioned this before, when you can actually have a company commander and his men, 100 men, are just a big section.
Mm-hmm.
So the balance is at every level, people are trained, and that way you can be. I actually find, and what I described about myself is, you can be autocratic, and also, it begins with D. What's the word? Democratic. Democratic leadership is when you talk together and make a plan. And one of the mistakes that people make with democratic leadership, they think, or when you describe it, is they think the group makes the decision. No, they don't.
Mm-hmm.
You get together. You can pass information between you and ask questions, even ask for advice. But from the advice given or information given, the leader makes the final decision. So I actually find that if I've got time and the people I know I can trust, I like to play the diplomatic way of leadership. Okay, fellas, we've got to do this. What do you think? Maybe if it's not always needed. And that way, the people you are leading feel even more part of the mission, and also they know what's going on, because it's
their plan.
They know what's going on. That's very important, because there's nothing worse, and I'm sure you've been in this situation, and I certainly have, when you don't know what's going on.
If you're the last man in the squad and there is no communication, then you
don't know what's going on.
You're
well,
just
I'm sure
walking.
We'll get into that at a later date. Yeah, so leaping ahead a bit there, but where was I? So
the Latvian training, right?
Latvian training. So that's how I cope with the guys in Paldiski. But before that, we had to train them. Now, as we did this, the actual camp itself is still being refurbished because the Soviets had destroyed it, or sabotaged it, I think is a better word, because the actual walls were there, but the radiators were ripped off and there was holes in pipes. As I mentioned before, the drinking water was actually deliberately combined with the sewage system, so they both mixed. We only found it out after many months. Nobody got ill though, thankfully. The training areas themselves, Adaji is a really big area which we could use.
So what's the terrain there like?
Flat.
Just flat?
Flat with lots of woods.
No swamp, no nothing. Or wetlands.
In the woods though, there's the lakes which make for swamps. Can be very jungle-like. I think like Estonia, but even flatter. So much
and
so
then
that
there's some open areas, right?
Yeah, I used to call it Flatvia, not Latvia. So Flatvia.
Latvia.
And it was
that's a great one.
That was quite unique because I've never been. The places I always normally go to are like this, up and down mountains and hills and things. The flat open plains you were able to move across in open order, although some of the small scrub, when you got closer to it, was actually up to your head. So it was heavily wooded with lots of mosquitoes, which means there was definitely swamps. And I used to joke that these mosquitoes must come from Texas because they are big, and they were even there in the winter. Because I also joked these mosquitoes actually wear skis. Yeah, they were even. I couldn't believe it. They even there in winter. So we had to get another. I think we got another resupply on the quick sent to us of mosquito repellent fortunately our issue repellent is pretty good, because those mosquitoes, they could cause quite a bit of damage. Yeah, so the train was, for what we wanted, it was good.
So now you start training. What's the training looking like?
So
what's your
the first-
plan of
so
the 9 months?
If I go from the beginning, then
Yeah.
the first thing we did was teach weapon. I say weapon because they only had rifles,
Mm-hmm.
and at this stage, the rifles were from their own countries. They were AK-47s. They might have been the more cheaper Chinese versions. But there were certainly many variations of the AK that they had. But an AK is an AK, really. So
Yeah.
no big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Some a bit better, some a bit not so.
So how long is that training?
Now, the funny thing with the AK, teaching that, I'll give an image. So
Mm-hmm.
we now taught that weapon how we teach weapons, which is very formal, but I think very thorough, and it also instills discipline, very good weapon handling, and you can build from it at a later date when you go onto the ranges and field firing. Now, when I went into that room, which were quite big rooms, which we could get our squads in to train, I saw what looked like a bunch of bandits. Everybody had their weapon held in a different position, pointing in the air, resting on feet, pointing at people to their sides, and a very casual, as I said, like a bunch of bandits.
Did you have an armory, or they just hold the weapons where they were?
We had an armory, I'm pretty sure of that, actually. Now, what we had done, we had taken our rifle lessons and used it as a template to write the instructions to teach the AK-47. So for example, lesson 1 is going to be normal safety precautions. It's going to be characteristics of the weapon, how to strip the weapon down. Lesson 2, how to load it, how to unload it, etc. In its logical sequence.
Mm-hmm.
And the way we are taught as platoon weapon instructors, we can teach any weapon, any infantry weapon in the world, but we base it on our pamphlet from the structure.
Mm-hmm.
If there's all you do is you change the technical details, and if there's different ways of doing things, you just take out what we've got in ours and you insert the new method, and it works very well. And also, because we're going to train them to do the same thing, they've now been taught a system which they can copy, and it's a structured system they can copy. It's not oh, I think I'll do it this way, and the other guy, I want to do it this way.
Was that also part of your instructions that, hey, this is how you should do it at the same time you were teaching, or it was just a byproduct that they should come
I
up
would
with
say
themselves?
it was a byproduct.
Mm.
It was a byproduct, but you know what? It's something I didn't consider then, but now I recognise that it's this systematic build-up that I was so used to that I didn't see it as actually a very important part of this ladder or evolution of training.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they are getting an image now of how we behave, and they are getting a structured lesson. Now, the first thing we taught was the standing load position, and this was to make sure that all the weapons were held the same way, pointing in the same direction, which was safe, and hands were in the same place on the weapon, and that was the first part. Now, we went through all the lessons, and important. One of some of the most important ones. How to hold the weapon, how to fire the weapon, so that the relationship of the butt is held firmly in the shoulder, the left hand holds the pistol grip, where the cheek goes, how you aim the weapon. I don't want to go into any more detail, but it's 2 periods to teach this, and we practice it. And what it really means is that when they go onto the range, it's gonna make them quite accurate immediately. And also, you can fault check them, and you know what to look at, and you can adjust them. It's not guesswork. And the other big one I remember, which was, there's 2 things that actually caused controversy, let's say. One was left-handed drills, and that was, we use the left hand to cock the weapon, to take the magazine off, because the right hand always stays on the pistol grip with the finger outside the trigger guard, or at the appropriate time on the trigger. And of course they were just used to doing this. So for some reason that caused quite a controversy, you know. So I think that rifle lesson actually was a way of taming the wild horse, because they were a bit wild. They come from,
how long did it last? Or is it 2 weeks? Or?
The actual weapon training itself would be about 10 hours, 10 periods. Okay. You know, but by the end of that, they are very proficient in weapon handling, and the final phase is they can pass a weapon handling test. Oh, and of course, the other controversial one was, we taught the immediate action, which is when the weapon fails to fire, what do you do? And I always remember this guy putting his arm up, and he's really excited, and he said to me, "Why do you do this? The weapon never fails to fire. It's an AK, it never stops shooting." And I said, well, straight away, you could cock the weapon, you see no rounds are in the magazine, no rounds are in the chamber, off magazine, on new magazine, cock and carry on firing. It's not guesswork. Also, you can have as we teach, you can have a blockage where the round isn't fed correctly, etc., etc. And we taught that. And the funny thing is, the first day we went on the range, and I'm supervising the shooting, he had a stoppage.
Murphy.
And he looked up at me, and I looked down at him, and I said, "Yeah, I think we can say that AK-47s do malfunction, because it's a machine, and all machines at some time malfunction."
And it's also an old one and shitty one.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree. It's a great weapon. You got a new AK. You're not gonna, it's very sturdy. Can get very dirty, and you got less chance of having a stoppage. But you got to train for it, and we did. So we taught the rifle, and I think that was that. As I said, that helped to tame the wild horse, because also they didn't know what to expect from us, and also they thought they were really well trained soldiers. And the other, I suppose, controversy was this AK-47 is our weapon from the Soviet bloc, which we've been using for a long time. How can you come in and teach it to us? these are things that I learnt later when they talked to me. Once they understood they could talk to me, you know, and as we discussed, once you build a relationship, you know, and then they said, yeah, you know what, you taught us a lot about the weapon we didn't know. We understand why you've got to do the immediate action, and they understood the discipline that we introduced to the weapon and how you deal with it. You know, all the safety rules, and it's imbued into you that you carry out safety precautions and what types of safety precautions and when you do it, etc., which are often forgotten, which lead to accidents and death. So
at what time?
Sorry.
Yeah, at what time they started to realize that they don't know so much, or at least, or even better, when did they start to admit it?
That's a good question. Because the good news from my perspective at that time was they are our trainees, and I could, you can sense it, you can sense this slight friction. I don't care, because I know what I've got to do, and you're going to do what I want. So in those initial stages, it is very autocratic, because also you're showing them who's boss. Because in the training world, in particular, when you've got to get people to do things which are quite unpleasant at a later stage, they've got to know it's not a discussion about doing it. You're going to do it because I said you're going to do it. And I think you must understand that from your world, you know, because you can't live in a discussion world, because of course
nothing happens.
There's many things like, I don't want to do. It must be crazy. No, you're going to do it. I'm not. You don't discuss it. I say you do. So certainly in those early days, it was I say you do, and you know what? That is a good question, because I know, and I mentioned this in one of my articles. This guy ended up being a lieutenant colonel, and it may be even when I was in Estonian uniform, when they would, you know, now we're friends, they'd tell me about things. They certainly said, for example, what we did in Adagi was the best thing I've done in my life. They all said that. They said it. They loved it. They loved it. And one of them said, and this guy was actually a Soviet tank driver also. He said to me, "We thought we knew it all. We thought, why have we got to go to Latvia and get retaught?" He said, very quickly, we learned we knew nothing. And he laughed. He laughed, you know. No, and it's always, because every time I talk about these things, I realise now there's even a similarity between when I mentioned about the guys with the 2 stripes who wanted to be section commanders. They were very angry. Same sort of. I know. I understand it. I do understand it. But they very quickly learn, I don't know, thank you for being taught, and thank you that I'm not in the higher leadership position, which is really difficult if you don't understand. And also because we're going to war, if I don't know. So I think I probably didn't find out about this until much later, even after the course. When they would start to discuss with me as a friend the training and some of their misconceptions initially.
Yeah.
And that's how I know about they were quite offended by us teaching them the AK, and they realised in the end that it was great.
Well, I've been in that similar situation where, like, the Americans came initially to Estonia to teach us, and they thought that we were kind of cave people. They asked us, "Hey, do you have TVs there in Estonia?" So they didn't have really good intelligence in that sense, what's actually happening here, that we have been 10 years in Afghanistan, Iraq already, that we have the basic skills there. So they also started to teach us on a very, and we on some things we thought that, okay, the things that you're saying, we actually knew more on some of the aspects now, because we had this kind of school that came from UK, I guess.
Yeah. Now, it wasn't quite the same. No, I absolutely understand what you've said.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely know about this. Because you know what, I'm going to be absolutely honest. I never considered these people to be cave people.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't cross my mind.
Yeah.
These could have been British soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to teach you the AK-47. This is how we do it. So you know what? No, I never ever thought of anybody as cave people. No, I never thought that. Never. No, I never. No, I never did. It's funny, I never did. Yeah, no, I never did. I know that in my heart. No, I never did that. I think that's probably why I got on with people in the end. I mean,
well, absolutely.
You know, just because you don't know doesn't mean you're a cave person. It just means you don't know.
Yeah,
that's okay, because there's many things I don't know, and that's why I was very open to learn from other people, even learn from the people you were supposedly training. And I think our guys understood that. And of course, the way we do lessons, part of the structure is any questions. And I find, and one of the reasons you ask questions is to confirm what you've taught. And it can also, maybe you've missed something out. So you can get a question back and you think, it could be, oops, we're going to do that in the next lesson, so we're not going to talk about that now. Thank you though. It's in the next lesson. Or, thank you for that question, it's very good. And you realise it's something that you missed. And you can now add it in. And as you become more experienced, you can, because you don't, it's good not to, okay, this is a bit, you know, it's good to add it and they don't understand that you missed it from the lesson. That's the instructor credibility. And if you have missed it from the lesson and it's important and you haven't got time, you're just going to insert it in the next one. So and it doesn't often happen, but it can happen, and it's not. So I like it, you know. And also it clears up misunderstandings. So, and I know I soon learned in this environment, even then, although I still felt, how can I put it this way? We were under the umbrella of this MOU, so regardless of conditions, it was by our rules. It was our rules, our structure, our way. That's what you signed up for. So there was no discussion about it. But no, the way we teach is we're open. So if there were things that would have prompted us to realise that what we're teaching is known by these guys, we would then turn it into a practice and not a teach. So I'd go back to the office and we discuss, and we always discuss things, and I'd say, look, do you know what, they can do this, they can do that, or they've got a knowledge of it. I didn't realise that, but I've talked to them afterwards privately, and they've said they've done these things in other places and they can do it. And I question them, and they know section battle drills the way we do it. Wow, right? And I'll talk, and we would revise the training program. This is not a teach; it's a practice.
Yeah,
it's actually easier for us. But what I would never do though, and because I did hear about this, what you said, it's a mistake that I've seen often. And I would have people approach me and ask me, or tell me, in fact, they come to me for advice, and I would end up quite in a good way. No, it's a good way, but I'd explain to them what Estonia has done, and they would be gobsmacked. It happened to me, I think, about 5 years ago.
Mm.
And I said, well, what are you doing here? What do you mean you want to teach basic lessons to these people? It's just no way. But it wasn't this guy's fault. He was sent out here without the correct information. And so I laid it out to him in actual fact a 1 hour debrief, because I knew immediately what his situation was. Because I know it's very uncomfortable for you to be in that position, and it's also, which I learned, we're going on now to what I learned in this environment over many years, was to be very open. And I would always say, look, have you done this? And if you have, I'm not going to teach it. We're going to practice and have a discussion about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because you don't
So
want
what happened?
you don't want to give offence, and also to teach something that they know or maybe even better at than you is very compromising. And I've found that some of the guys who came out compromised themselves quite badly because of that approach.
Mm.
And they're not the only ones who made that mistake. And perhaps you can sometime we can have like a just have one podcast where you put together lots of ideas and questions, and I'll give my perspective of it, because that's a very interesting one, that, and it's something that I've seen identified. And I've given quite stern talks to some British and Americans about this. Quite stern.
Yeah, I think that would be great to just go back and forth doing Q&A.
Yeah, that'd be interesting, that one. And because it's upset me, and it also affected me, because we're going on a bit of a different subject now, but when I changed uniforms and came back, I found that British Army small, what's it they were called? Short-term training teams, and they were coming out, and it was exactly the same thing. They thought they were teaching tribesmen in Africa who had spears, and now if they just knew how to use a rifle and they knew how to do basic fire manoeuvre, now we're like, that's super soldiers to them, that's their level. And it's just, and I'd be like, for Christ's sake, and I'd say to them, we've just done the Baltic Battalion, we've just trained a battalion, for Christ's sake, and you want to come out and teach fire manoeuvre? And that's something I've got to talk about, that there was a lack of communication between countries about what had been done leading to this situation.
So everyone came in.
Feel quite strongly about it, you know.
Everyone came in and they thought that it's a white paper.
Well, everybody came in thinking they were the first people to come here.
Yeah.
And I still see it even to this day. Which quite amuses me. And they say to me, how long have you been here? And I say, 30 years. Which actually, it is such an outlandish comment, or could be, that they fail to register it.
Mm-hmm.
I had one Yank SF guy turn around to me and said, he said, hey, yeah, we've been coming out here for 31 years. And I said, no, not the unit has been sending people for 31 years. I said, I've been here for 30 years. And he couldn't comprehend that.
Yeah.
That's another story for another day. So yeah, so it wasn't insulting to teach these guys the rifle. They had to know it our way, because we also know when we come on to other skills such as field firing, if you don't do these skills that are standard, it can get very dangerous. So we teach it. You're going to pass the weapon training test. You're then competent to use live ammunition. And so I can now really talk about the shooting phases. So we actually built ranges in Adaji because we actually, that's right, yeah. Because we're a donation, we actually had some electric targets donated to us from Sweden.
Did you do it together with the trainees?
So one of the guys got detailed off, and he he built the range with all the correct dimensions and safety angles, and it was an electric target range. So you had the pits dug, and you could put the electric targets in the pits at different ranges. You know, that was great. That worked well.
Mm-hmm.
And then yet again, we used our British Army School of Infantry template on shooting skills to then train the shottist. So we grouped in zeroed on a static range. The only thing we found was with the AK-47, its maximum effective range was 250 meters. To hit a target at 300 was very difficult.
Yeah.
So 250 was doable. So we actually lowered the standard to the weapon. And of course it can go the other way. If you've got a really precise weapon, you can actually increase standards. So the only difference was we lowered some of the distances. In this case, the maximum range was 250. So eventually we did all the different position shooting up to 250 meters with the AK-47. And from that, because we've now proved they've passed their shooting test, so they're accurate, we then ultimately did all the skills and drills with live ammunition. That's the cherry on the cake, and of course that's towards the end of training.
So that's towards the so the basic is it in phases, like in terms of like you teach them the basic skills for 3 months or something?
So we've taught, and I'm leaping ahead of myself, but just to show the sort of sequence of the rifle, so we can safely go on at the end to do everything we've done with dry, blank, live in realistic circumstances on this wonderful range in Adazi, because the range in Adazi was really big, which means you could manoeuvre on it safely. So we could do section and troop battle drills. It's great there. It's great doing that. Great confidence builder for the guys as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we only had the rifle. It would have been great if we'd had machine gun, because that would have been a great experience for them, because there's something that I did notice at a later date in my later life, if you get what I mean. The machine gun training was just terrible. There was just absolutely no conception about how to teach it. That's another story for another day. So we taught now individual skills. So that's the field craft, and but it starts at the beginning, like how to pack your equipment so it remains dry, how to wear your equipment, how to live in the field, so it's not camping. At first, you could say it's the first weekend we do this. It is close to camping, I would argue, quite close, because they've been shown how to put a bivvy up. They've been shown how to cook their food. They've been shown how to keep themselves clean as possible in the field, so they don't get bad feet and bad crutch injuries and bad armpits and all the rest of it. Which actually seems, why do you teach that? Well, because when you don't, people get injured very quickly. And also about how to wear your equipment, how much to wear and how little to wear depending on the circumstances. Because that's another thing that had to be taught. When it's not taught, it leads to too much being worn, which then leads to overheating, or all your kit gets wet. So you start off warm, you end up wet and sweating, and you've got nothing to change into, which I often see with untrained people.
Sounds like a conscription service again.
Actually, yes, but done properly.
Yeah.
But done properly, because I sent you those pictures of guys in a so-called bivvy when I was actually in British uniform, and I knew, and I thought, now that's what tramps do. That's what tramps do under bridges.
Mm.
So it is actually starting the process from the beginning, but being taught properly. And also you've got to understand at that time, those things were not being taught in any shape or form.
I get it.
Because
it's
what
like
you were being taught,
you start from a clean sheet.
Yeah, because what you were being taught actually was based on that and what I've introduced into the system.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very good that you did that. Now, of course, I go back to what I said before. If some guys have said, "Oh, we know how to do this, we know how to do that," I say, "Great, stop, do it, and then fault check."
Mm-hmm.
But no, it was all completely new to them.
Yeah.
They had no idea about how to live properly. No, then this is living properly in the field, so you can go tactically. Because after that, everything's tactical. And to live out of your Bergen and just to live under a small sheet of plastic and maintain your health and all the rest of it and do your job is a real skill.
Yeah.
And then but the main thing also is we've created a standard so we can then fault check.
Mm-hmm.
You will if your Bergen is unpacked, why? The only thing that should be out of your Bergen is if you're using it. If it's not, it's in your Bergen because we may get crash moved. Your rifle, your fighting order is always so close to you. If it's not worn, you can dive to it, etc. You know, small things which are not when they're not taught.
Yeah.
You don't use torches, or if you do, it's got to be under a sheet where you can't see it.
Mm.
No smoking at night. And if you do smoke, we better not see it. Because you know what, I'm not going to get, you know, if I can't see it, I'm not going to, you know, it didn't happen. But if I see it, it's death and destruction. So yes, we are starting off from the basics, but as we progress with training, people still didn't do what they'd been taught, you know, to look after their feet, to drop their trousers, to wipe all the sweat off their in between their legs and all the rest of it, and use some foo powder, we say.
Mm-hmm.
They get injured, and we had one guy. He was. And I looked at him, and I could see that he was finding it very difficult to walk. And I said, "What's the problem?" And it ended up he had a massive rash between his legs. And I questioned him and said, "Have you been doing what we said? Dropping your trousers, getting some fresh air, wiping away any sweat and grime?" He said, "No." I said, "Well, that's why you've got that severe rash, and it's painful, isn't it?"
Mm-hmm.
And also, once you get it, it's very difficult to get rid of. Now you're
Absolutely.
outside in those dirty conditions. So that comes under the heading of hygiene in the field. Very important. How to live in the field with your Bergen packed correctly, that it remains packed at all times unless you are using something. The routine, how to cook, when to cook. That if you cook, it's one person can do this, the other person can do this. If you clean your weapons, how do you clean your weapon in the field? It can be split routine, so if something happens when you're cleaning your weapon, at least you've got half the platoon that has got their weapons fully assembled so they can react, and once they react you can put yours back together. You know, what appears to be simple things, but if they're not taught, can lead to disaster.
I agree. So
and
yeah,
things.
it's
Another
exactly.
thing we taught in those early stages is duties of a sentry.
Mm.
And that actually is one of my favourite lessons, and I think it's because of what I told you about with that fighting patrol.
Yeah.
It's actually a very detailed lesson. And one of the problems with sentries is many armies don't do sentry routine properly. And there's and I'm not going to go through the lesson because it's about 2 hours long, but there's a lot to it. But also we actually teach that lesson if we can in quite a funny way with what can go wrong and how to do it correctly. And also on that supposed camping weekend, because we've done that lesson on day one, that night they have a sentry routine. So they've also got to learn how to get out of their sleeping bag if they've got if it's been raining that day and their equipment was wet, well, they've got to take off their wet clothes, put on their dry trousers, and when they go on sentry, they've got to put on their wet clothes. I mean, so it's, again, doing that in the dark is a big thing to introduce them to behaving tactically in the field. And they never did that as a conscript.
Mm-hmm.
In the conscript, it's camping, it's fires, it's torches, it's smoking, it's noise, and also we do noise and light. We have a noise and light demonstration, which shows how noises carry at night in particular, about how light is seen so easily, and other things like digging and all the normal things that you may do in the field, that how it can be heard.
Yeah.
So you see, after we do that, we can insist upon people doing things quietly, with no light. They've always got sentries on. Their equipment is always packed correctly. That's the introduction to making them tactical soldiers.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I mean, if you think about it in civilian terms, then you kind of teach the person who comes to your company, hey, this is how we do coffee. This is how we open a washing machine. This is how we put dishes. Like, it's a details, which people may think that
it may be that when they make coffee, they spill it over the table, leave sugar as well on the table spilt, and they just go away because their mums clean it up after them.
Yeah.
And of course, it's an office work. We haven't got any mums, so you could apply that. Say, it seems basic, but when it's not done, that can lead to actually a lot of. But it can actually lead to some bad things happening, because things grow because of sugar in coffee mixed on tables. It's going to make the other people upset about other people's bad behaviour. Yeah. So yeah.
But yeah, that's what it is. That's what the basic course is.
But that's why, and I fully understand now, because many things were said to me which were just over my head, because it's like, well, of course, if you don't get the basics right, you will not get the bigger things right. So the discipline of the rifle being taught the way it is, the discipline of how people behave in the field. So as we start to do other lessons about other individual skills, we always expect people to be quiet. We expect people to be spaced out. We don't expect people to be sat around in groups talking and pretending that it's just a holiday. No, everything we do is for real. You don't.
Everything is like a tactical situation.
Every time we went out, we treated it tactically. If we,
That's the best way.
Lessons, in between lessons, it was all tactical. So, if we were going between lessons, they would have to disperse into the woods. They'd have to get a fire position. They'd have to have right spaces, and they'd have to be quiet.
Yeah, that's how you get the, what's the word? That's how you get the right routines in there. Because otherwise, you're training the administrative routine, which is bullshit.
We are building on it every time. These what we consider basic skills, but many armies don't do it, and when you don't.
Yeah, it goes bad because
you get identified very quickly.
Yeah, you will build up wrong habits.
Yeah, wrong habits.
It's like I know that in a tactical situation I should do this. At the moment I do that, and eventually in a tactical situation you are doing the wrong things.
Yeah, we used to have a saying. Some people would say semi-tactical, half and half, and we'd say there's no such thing.
No.
No such thing.
Yeah, it just builds your wrong habits, and eventually you will get lazy.
Yeah.
And then we'll transition into your tactical world.
And also it means even when you're doing quite basic things, you can still teach and also, importantly, practice them. Because they're also naturally finding places to take cover and a fire position where they can also see and aim their weapons. Because this was taught to me from day one, and because as a trainer I always taught it, I thought it was obvious. But when it's not taught, what you see is just a bunch of bandits stood in the wood, bunch of gypsies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's perfectly said.
And if I know that if I go and see an army and I see that, I can tell straight away their training is poor and they're a weak army. Conversely, and it's funny because I had some green berries come out and visit me in Paldiski, and I have to admit I was laughing to myself because they were absolutely amazed by what they saw. And I'm stood behind them just listening, and one of them said to his buddy, "This is just like we do."
Yeah.
And I have to admit, I just thought, well, why would we do it any differently? Because it's just logical. I quite like that though. It was quite funny. They were quite shocked by that.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine.
They did not expect that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that's going ahead of myself. So we taught individual skills. So that's how to find a fire position, how to different methods of movement. Leopard crawl, monkey run, etc. How to move across country, how to select a route. It's navigation. So we also taught map reading and navigation in the woods. So once all the individual skills have been taught,
so how long was that period? Months? 3 months? 2 months?
I think we probably. Thing is, we tend to. We just don't. Okay, we don't like have. We will teach 2 weeks individual skills. We will then teach 2 weeks of this. We try and have. We design it so it's a varied routine. But of course, the art to it is it's varied, but you don't move on to a bigger skill which requires a lower skill which hasn't been taught yet. So I will try and mix and match. But yeah, for sure, the physical training. We had a PTI with us. So whilst we would take guys for speed marches and runs, we also had circuit training. So we did actually build up their physical ability very strongly actually, and they got very fit. They were happy with that because at the end of training they were looking pretty awesome. So yeah, we taught individual skills, we taught weapons, and also English language was being taught as well in those early days. Once we taught that, we then moved on to the section work, and that's when it's getting meaty. So I would say that the first 2 months was spent on weapon training and the individual skills, and then we moved on about March time to the squad. And I'm quite sure we actually, I know we would have done this. We like to do section battle drills, the squad hasty attack first, because when we come on to patrolling, you may have to do a fighting patrol. You may have to do contact drills as part of the actions on, and the squad attack provides all the meat. So you can take the cut of meat from that to the part of that you need for this other task.
Yeah.
And also with the section battle, what I love about the section battle drill is it confirms all the individual skills such as where to take cover, how to move, section formations. It tests target indication. It tests fire manoeuvre, and it tests the communication of the squad. Oh, and fire control orders. Off the top of my head. So that's why also in later life if I met people, and it's funny enough because it's linked to what we just talked about, I would be given a group of people and told to train them. And the trouble was, yes, some of these guys may know a lot. Some of them may not know anything. Some of them just think they know everything. So I would tell them, we're going to do section battle drills. And I have to admit, because of some things now filtered into the army, I'm going back to the early days in particular, because some things had filtered in, it actually, yet again, it was paying off for me. Because okay, we know there's 6 section battle drills. Great, do you need me to teach it? No, we can do it. Oh, great, we're going to go and do it. And then when I did it, I would identify all the weaknesses very quickly. And importantly, they would. And then I would ask them, what do you think you're weak on? What would you like me to improve? And they go, this. So now I've got them wanting to do what I want them to do. Because they want to do it. So that's my advice I would give to anybody who came out to train people. If they actually have to be, if they are given people, okay, well, find out what they can do. And
Let them demonstrate first.
And also tell them, you may be able to teach me something.
Yeah.
So you know what? If you think we've got a weakness, you can teach us. So I would always say to that group of people, you know what? And if you do it so well, and you show me, so even if you do it differently and it's good, I will actually learn that, and I'm going to write away to the School of Infantry and tell them that I've seen some new techniques which are really good, and I think we could actually change this drill because of this reason. And the actual School of Infantry actually promote this, and you can write to them and explain why you think a lesson or a drill should change.
Mm-hmm. So just to be aware, we have about 10 minutes left.
Okay, right. So the section battle drill, it was great to solve that complicated problem when you're dealing with people who may know a lot. You can confirm they do, or you can confirm their weaknesses, and that group then are going, yeah, please help us.
Yeah, I like it. I like that idea. I like that idea a lot.
And that way, both sides are built a relationship, and also they go, yeah, I don't know. Please help me.
I actually did something like that with like a year ago or 2 years ago when I went to the the assembly what we have RUC,
yeah, I understand,
right? Yeah. And I was handed a team of people who were out, who hasn't been together for 20 years, and then what I did is that when we went and did those basic drills, I actually let them do how they would do it. And then I would also, in every iteration when we were moving from point A to point B on I don't know, let's go to that demonstration area, training area, I put them information, and I made it so that every person in that squad had to be on a squad leader's position.
Yeah.
So I switched out everyone because they haven't done it for 20 years. So we established a baseline, who is capable of doing anything, because you can be a sergeant, but it was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And now you may be a private, but you've been leading, I don't know, a forklift team in a civilian sector somewhere. And what eventually happened is that after we did that, and I said, okay, now you choose who will be your squad leader based on that experience that you just got. Because now they know that there are people who were not capable of being squad leaders at all. So they understood that, hey, I don't want to be in that role at all. So, and there were people who kind of were good, but they didn't want to tell that I want to be. So they decided eventually, based on their experience of, I don't know, half a day on a field. And eventually that was their plan. Now, that was their team, which they put together.
the tool of the section battle drill, which I use, is very clear to everybody. It's clear to me. It's clear to them.
Yeah.
There's no argument. They can't fire a manoeuvre. They can't indicate a target. They certainly can't give a fire control order. They take cover. They can't see the enemy because, you found a big hole to lie in. Well, what use are you up there? You are just laying in the open, and you're going to get taken out very easily, etc., etc., etc. And they go, yeah, you're right, But and of course, there's a way of going about it,
Yeah, absolutely.
But so what you've done is actually called practice to assess. And that's part of the function of a practice period. Practice to assess, and you then work on weaknesses and improve it to the correct standard.
Yeah.
If you identify that they have forgotten so much or don't know, then you have to reteach or teach it again. That is rare. That is rare, actually. Normally, it's work on the weaknesses.
Yeah, because otherwise, like, it all depends on how much time you have.
Yeah, and it saves time as well, and also because the other rule we have is you don't teach something that's already been taught. You've been taught that. I'm now going to practice it. I'm not going to teach it again because you should know it.
Yeah.
I'm going to find out now how good you are. Identify the weaknesses because we accept things degrade, and then I'm going to bring you up to the correct standard, and that's my job as the trainer. So we do the section battle drills, and yet again within that there's all the individual skills. So you are now practicing that as a unit, so that's great. And also with section battle drills, you are starting to train the leaders, because it's a very difficult. It is difficult. I know it's difficult because guess what? I was put in these positions. It's very difficult under that. It's also very physically. It's very physically demanding. You've got to be able to read the ground and try and identify a method where you can move to successfully kill the enemy without getting all your guys killed. And that takes so making the plan requires that cognitive ability we talked about, which I'm so keen on. And of course, the way we build it is it's very obvious. You can go left flanking. There's a big gully. It is obvious where he is because I've made sure he can be clearly seen. The ground is flat and not too physically demanding. So what I'm after in the initial stages is this 1 stage, 2 stage, 3 stage, 4 stage, 5 stage, 6 stage, but now under conditions where there is an enemy firing blanks. So I would build up to that, and of course once that happens, they can do that correctly, which will take a number of attempts. We can then add to the problems, which I've talked about before, and I've talked about in detail in those articles I wrote. Because you can do section battle drills forever until they are just so good, so slick, and so quick at finding the solution. It's great, but of course there's never enough time. But I like section battle drills. It's confirmed a lot of individual skills, and we're now starting to teach the leaders, because also this is a leadership course. Because these guys are going to be, all these guys we've got are going to go back and be the section commanders or troop sergeants or sergeant major or troop commanders of this company. So similar to what you've just said, everybody gets a chance.
So I think that's a perfect place to park it, because next time we can then start talking about the leadership training and move from there, and that will be really interesting part. Okay.
Well, we finished now on getting to the squad phase. I'll go into a little bit more detail about that, and I think talking about leadership would be good.
next time we have a lot of questions in terms of the leadership. How did you train that? What were the actual pitfalls? What you saw? What they did? Why was that? And so on and so forth. So, yeah, looking forward to that next conversation about how military or how pretty much you guys started to build the leaders, because I'm quite sure that they didn't have the skills.
This is why I was pleasantly surprised about the quality of the Estonian man. Actually, I thought they learned very quickly, but for sure, we don't. I'll just say this simply now to finish it. We train leaders by putting them in positions of leadership, not reading about it. They've been taught the skill, they've got to do the skill, they've got to lead the skill, and then at the end of it we'll debrief them and tell them the mistakes they made and how they can improve. So it's by doing. It's very much hands-on.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah,
and if they can't do it, it's clearly seen by everybody. And it's also clearly seen by the man himself.
Exactly, that's what I want to, like, everyone understands now. There's no place to hide.
Yeah, there's no place to hide. There's no place to hide. Okay,
thanks, Chris.
I've got one or two photographs actually of me debriefing guys after this, and the funny thing is, the funny thing is, and then the British terminology of being funny, it's not funny. It's their faces. They're looking at the ground, and this is important. They know what mistakes they made. And I love that, because they've identified. Because if you identify it yourself, it means you understand.
Yeah, that's the best part of the training to me, and that's why it's a good topic.
And that's why.
So Chris,
let's leave it there. Nice talking to you again. Happy Easter, and it was a short one, but I think we still did hour and 20 minutes, sorry.
Yeah, next time I will have my gear set up better, so this will not happen what happened in the beginning of this show.
Yeah, okay, well, lesson learned.
Lesson learned. Next time.
Lesson learned by the mistakes you made. You've been able to identify the mistakes, so you can work on it yourself.
Yep, exactly.
Well done.
All right. Bye bye.
Okay. See you next week or whenever.
Yep.
Okay, see ya. Bye.